Hello, Westminster.
I look forward to seeing you on Sunday. We'll have the opportunity to worship together during our normal services in the morning. We'll have an additional 1:30 service that will reflect the same order of worship as our morning services. But we also will have an evening service. We're going to be starting a new thing this summer. We're going to have an outdoor summer series. And so we invite you to join us at 6:30 here on site, outdoor. At the morning services, we expect and require people to wear masks. At the evening service, we encourage you to do so, but masks are not required. So we hope that you will feel comfortable to join us on one of those two services. As we get ready to come back together for worship this Sunday, I was reading through Colossians chapter 4, 2 through 6, and I wanted to read that to you in light of a lot of what's going on in our culture. Paul writes, starting in verse 2, "Continue steadfastly in prayer, being watchful in it with thanksgiving. At the same time, pray also for us, that God may open to us a door for the word, to declare the mystery of Christ, on account of which I am in prison, that I may make it clear, which is how I ought to speak. Walk in wisdom toward outsiders, make the best use of the time. Let your speech always be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how you ought to answer each person." Paul was in prison, and this wasn't the first time he was imprisoned. As we read in 2 Corinthians chapter 11, we see that Paul faced imprisonment many times. He was beaten many times to the point of being close to death. And in fact, in Acts chapter 14, leaders lead a crowd into a riot. They stone Paul and drag him out of the city thinking he's dead. Somehow, miraculously, he survived. And what does Paul do? He gets up and he goes to a nearby city, Derbe, and he continues preaching the gospel and making disciples. I think that's remarkable. Instead of being overcome by evil, Paul decided by the power of the gospel to overcome evil with good. How does this apply? There's three things Paul does in this passage, and he bids us to do these things. And as we do them, it will uniquely equip us to overcome evil with good. He says that we need to pray, we need to walk, and we need to talk. First, he says pray. Look at verse 2. He says, "Continue steadfastly in prayer, being watchful in it with thanksgiving." Did you catch that? He says pray steadfastly, watchfully, and thankfully. Now this is remarkable given Paul's desperate situation of being unjustly persecuted and imprisoned, and yet he maintains this perspective of faithful, watchful, steadfast prayer. He responds so differently than I'm tempted to respond. I'm tempted to just complain and vent or give in to my fear. But Paul says pray. And he continues, he says, pray that God would open a door. And then when he does, he says, do the next thing, and that is walk. Walk. Walk in wisdom toward outsiders, making the best use of the time. He doesn't say, wait for the perfect time. He says, make the best use of this time, this moment right now. And how do we do it? He says, by walking in wisdom toward outsiders. He doesn't say, run in fear, or react in haste, or domineer with your anger, but he says, walk in wisdom toward outsiders. And then he says, speak. Part of walking in wisdom toward outsiders means speaking wisely. And he says, let your speech be gracious. And I don't know about you, I ask, well, what does gracious speech look like? Is that just politically correct speech? Is that flattering speech? And I don't think that's what he's talking about, because he uses a very vivid metaphor to show us what gracious speech is. He says, let your speech be always gracious, seasoned with salt. Now, salt was a very valuable commodity, particularly in an age where they didn't have refrigeration. Salt did three things. First, it was a preservative. Salt stopped the decay of anything that it was rubbed into. And in the same way, we have to ask ourselves, does our speech stop the decay that we see around us, or does it just participate in the decay and advance it? Secondly, salt is a seasoning. It takes that which is common and mundane and makes it savory and flavorful. And in the same way, we have the opportunity to use our words in ways that bring life and flavor and zest to our situations and as we relate to others. And then third, when our speech is used as a preservative and when it's used as a seasoning, it can then be used as a cleansing agent. Salt was a cleansing agent. You would rub it into wounds and it stung, but it cleaned out all the infection. In the same ways, our words are to be true, and sometimes true words sting. We're not to be afraid of that. But it needs to be a stinging that brings healing. And so as we pray, as we walk, as we speak, we have great opportunities to overcome evil with good.